Shall we start? Ladies and gentlemen, now that the best people are here, we can commence. I'm so sorry that the audience is thinner than it would have been, but we are competing with the new Nobel Prize man. And therefore, I think we can do no better than commence our proceedings by applauding him for his outstanding achievement, which we shall applaud. And then maybe after a while, he might show up here. Who knows? Now, this talk this tell me if you can't hear me at any time. It's called Restructuring the Northeast, Some Radical Thoughts. My object was to jog people out of old grooves, disturb them, question all their age-old beliefs about the Northeast, which is largely a load of nonsense, which has been fed to them by governments that have been ignorant and uncaring. And I'm outraged, as everyone must be, that our compatriots from the Northeast are still seen by some of our heartlanders, as they call them, not mainlanders, as foreigners because of ignorance and arrogance. There is no understanding, even in the government, even the Prime Minister's office, the Foreign Office, or anywhere, that Southeast Asia, whichever way you look at it, either begins or ends at Siliguri, which is the tiny 22-kilometer neck that connects this huge elephant's ear called the Northeast to the rest of the country, getting on to 50 million people. Now this is Mongoloid India, so most ignorant people, we abolished geography and history soon after I left school. And we are totally illiterate in this country on those subjects. The nonsense people talk from prime ministers, yes, successive prime ministers. Mr. Modi thinks that Pataliputra is in Pakistan and Taxila is in India. What do you have to say to that? And that's not the only bloomer, and he's not the only one. It goes on. So, the Northeast was a remote area, the last to be conquered by the British on the eastern marches, but not as much in the news as the Northwest Frontier Province. These were quieter areas inhabited by myriads of tribes. And they were cordoned off behind a so-called inner line so that they could continue governance in their own fashion without raiding the plains areas. It was the insurgency and the 1962 debacle that made people realize that the Northeast mattered. The Northeast is highly fragmented and polyglot. And though it is a geostrategic and geopolitical entity, no one in government, from Jawaharlal Nehru onwards, has realized that that is so. Why is it so? Because this huge territory is linked to India by this Siliguri neck. Since we don't know geography, we don't understand geopolitics or geostrategy. And we thought the best development for the Northeast was to neglect it, especially after 1962, for fear that otherwise, if we built a road, the Chinese will roll down, and to deal with that problem, we'd have to create another 10 or 20 divisions. This was idiocy of a very superior order. And this is the kind of nonsense that went on. No one questioned it because they did not understand it. I don't want to be rude, but even in this hall, there's no map of the Northeast. If you ask some of the people here, where is the Northeast? Or where within the Northeast is Manipur or Nagaland? Many will not know where to look. We've not taught it. We've not taught the history of the region. We've not taught the geography of the region. And the whole thing is terra incognito. Under the recommendations of the States Reorganization Commission, it was decided to set up, having broken up the states country-wise, decided to set up regional development councils, 5 or 6 of them, for the north, for the south, for the west, for the east, for the center, and for the northeast. All the rest faded away. The Northeast Council remained, but it was made a central body with a very pitiable mandate and no powers. So what do we have is ignorant people in Delhi running a colony in the Northeast, saying we know best. It's a shame. And nobody questions that. And this remote control has led to sullen, disinterested cadres. We had a fine body of men called the Indian Frontier Administrative Service, dedicated to open-air government in the field. In '68, that was abolished. So we have we need an entirely new structure. We have a structure of governance that just doesn't fit. Nobody understands who is supposed to do what. As in most tribal communities, and elsewhere too, the tradition has been to build from the bottom upwards. Panchayati Raj, upwards to block development offices, and then to Zilla Parishads, and then to the state, and then to the center. But instead of being bottom-up, which is the tradition, it's been made top-down. And the wonderful traditions of the grassroots have been squashed. Mr. Pandey, I'm sorry I didn't introduce our guests. Mr. Pandey, who was Chief Secretary in Nagaland and has been much else, had in the, about, 15 years ago, derived from the Naga village councils and community sense, a system that he called of communitization. Schools were not running. Classes were empty. Primary health centers were running. There were no doctors. If there were doctors, there were no medicines. If there were medicines, they were all expired. And so on. Electricity. No electricity because nobody paid bills or maintained the thing. So what he said, that we'll hand over responsibility to the village community. You know who's who. From this transformer, this village or these 3 villages will get electricity. So much. You decide how you'll share it and how you'll charge. So much per bulb. With the result that electricity dues disappeared. Everybody paid. Because if anybody cheated, the rest of the community would deal with them. Likewise in school. Teachers were told by parents, you better come and teach, or else. With the result that schools were full. Primary health centers, the same thing. There was an absolute transformation. It's one of the most remarkable experiments tried out in India. What credit did we give Mr. Pandey? Nothing. We've just forgotten what he did. What a disgrace. Now, what is the alternative? Why should the Northeast be ruled like a colony from Delhi with people who don't have the slightest understanding? Why should they not have self-rule? Now, the way to do this, I suggest, would be to repatriate power, bottom up, to the Northeast, through village councils, which have worked wonderfully well, larger councils and bodies, and so on, upwards, and the state government. And then I would say that for the Northeast as a whole, there should be a Northeast Council, not the bogus body that's there now with no powers, to be the government of the Northeast. So that instead of the governance of the Northeast being from Delhi, with something called the Northeastern Council, and something else called the Donor Ministry, bad name, Department of Northeast Region, but it suggests you're begging for money. You become the governance. And the government will be in Guwahati or Shillong or wherever it is. Now people will say, how can you have a central ministry, so-called, located outside of Delhi? Unthinkable. Is it? Where is the Department of Atomic Energy located? Homi Baba said, told Nehru, if you want me to have anything to do with it, it shall be in Bombay. And so it was to this day. There's a little post office here for liaison. Likewise for space. The Department of Space is located in Bangalore because Vikram Sarabhai said, if you want to have the department, it will have to be located, and want me to have anything to do with it, it will be located in Bangalore. Then at a slightly different level, the National Dairy Development Board was set up, NDDB, by Kurian, and that manages milk production, distribution, milk policy for the country, though it's a cooperative. And he said, why should I come to Delhi? Where's the milk? Where are the cows? You come here. So in Anand we have the headquarters of the National Dairy Development Board. 3 outstanding institutions without the interference of the central government. So we need the same thing here. Then what kind of structure should the Northeastern Council have? As I say, it's the only part of the country which has 5 international boundaries: Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, Myanmar, Bangladesh. Now who should govern it? Now if you want to do anything, want to get a visa, come to Delhi. Want a commerce trade, come to Delhi. Clearance for an electricity project, come to Delhi. The correspondence takes 6 months. The doing of it takes 6 years. The result is 0. And we've lived with that nonsense for all these years. What we needed, therefore, is a secretariat with a ministerial level officer as head of the Northeastern Council, as a central minister, and with officers of the level of joint or additional secretary drawn from the Foreign Office, the Commerce Ministry, the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Water Resources, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Tourism, and any other relevant body, so that they are there on the spot. If there's a problem on the Burma border, the man can deal with it immediately, instead of having to wait for some fuddy-duddy from Delhi even to understand where the place is. I'm amazed that we've tolerated this rubbish. Nobody has the wit. No Prime Minister. No donor ministry with a lot of rubbish has done anything to understand the problem and deliver the goods. Everyone packs their bags, comes to the Northeast, has a good time, draws a lot of TADA, goes back, and nothing happens. That's the way we've run that area. That cannot go on. And the Northeast, as a isolated regional pocket, bounded by hills and foreign countries, must be a regional air hub. Now Indian Airlines, that arch monopoly, incompetent set of fellows, and all the others, Jet, name it, they have not allowed a regional airline. They have time and again deliberately, willfully killed it. Why? Because of the hills. And the clock is 1 hour in advance of Delhi by the sun. You have to clear the mountains and be back at base in Calcutta before it gets dark. And therefore, your day starts from Calcutta having wasted 2 hours. And it ends in Guwahati, from where you fly back to Calcutta. Wasting a lot of time. For what purpose? Why do they want it? Because the airline bosses, the pilots, their air hostesses think it's more fun to spend the evening in Park Street in Calcutta than in Guwahati. That is the reason. And we accept that. We've been blackmailed left, right and center. When local airline proposals have been made, selection of aircraft have been suggested, these have all been vetoed. Now we built an international airport and an air cargo terminal at Guwahati. Barring laterally, not 1 ounce of commercial traffic has flown. No, very few passengers. The Chinese said they're willing to operate a line. We said no. I suggested for years, if nothing else, run charters, make tourism packages, because 60% of Maldives tourism depends on charter flights coming from Germany, Italy and anywhere else. Plane loads. Why don't we do the same? Yes, we must do it. Not one charter flight has landed. Then we built the More-Kaladan road as a favor to the Burmese, at the border. More to the Burmese side and on to south to Kaleva and Kalemiu. And the idea was then it would link through a bridge and go to Mandalay to stimulate Indo-Myanmarese trade and on to Thailand. We built the road, spent 100 crores. The Burmese were very proud. At that time when it was inaugurated and I did that ride, it was the best road in Burma. Not 1 ounce of commercial traffic has moved because you didn't have the wit to understand if you build a road, something is going to ply. What is that? Not to carry headloads, trucks, vehicles, but you require agreements between countries. You need immigration rules. You need checkpoints. You need currency exchanges and so on. Nothing was done. Even to this day. So that's another shocker. Now we are building the Kaladan project, multimodal project, water and land from southern Mizoram to Sitwe, a port in Myanmar, which we are renovating as an alternative to going via Chittagong. We're spending a lot of money, and everyone tom-toms what a great project it is. I fear it's going to be another thundering disaster for the same reason. Nobody knows who on earth is going to run that. Who is going to operate the vessels? Where have you trained the people? Where will you harbor them? What about immigration, customs, the whole works? Have you spoken to the chambers of commerce on the Indian side, on the Burmese side? And the Indian and Burmese meet at the midpoint. Will you be able to speak without interpreters and signages? Nothing is there. These idiots haven't thought about it. I am amazed at the absolute downright folly of these fools. Pardon my strong language. I'm trying to restrain myself. But what can one consider all of that except with total contempt? And everyone throws their weight around. Now I shouldn't go on. I must stop. But my last point is that this is not to say that because there's a fifth fourth tier, panchayat, block, district, state, and regional, before you get to the center. This does not mean that the Northeast is not going to be part of India. In the same way, I don't want to delve into that here, a similar proposal for the Northwest. If you look at the Cabinet Mission proposal, Part A, Part B, Part C, Part A or B, whichever you like, was Pakistan. That's gone. But that scheme, A, B, C, A is India, B would be the Northeast, and C would be Kashmir and that whole area, as confederal entities with self-governance in those areas. Now, these are radical thoughts. They are not unconstitutional. Let me tell you what we do with our constitution. During the emergency, when we wanted to annex Sikkim, which we did brutally, I lost the thread of what I was going to say. Yes, we decided to make Sikkim an associate state of India in about 3.5 minutes flat. I'm not exaggerating. It probably wouldn't even be 5 minutes. A constitution bill was passed called Sikkim, associate state, to give Sikkim the right to elect 2 members to sit in the Indian Parliament and be the representatives here. There was no discussion when this piece of nonsense was unleashed on the country. And all the wise people nodded their head because there was a state of blue funk with the emergency approaching. They didn't have the character, the guts, the principles, or the understanding to do anything. With the result that people said, what is this? You're changing the character of India from a federation to a confederation, where you have India, center, states, and then the associate state of Sikkim, which has all rights in India and is seated in the Indian Parliament, but has no responsibility. I mean, the imagination boggles at the kind of nonsense that went on. But I must stop here because I've already far, far outspoken my time. So I think I have various suggestions how to deal with the infiltrators and our electorate. They're all soluble problems, but there's no application of mind. Idiocy rules. And what I want to say is we've got to prize ourselves out of this, otherwise nothing is going to work. 60 years have been wasted, another 60 years will pass, and then we'll say, you know, I'm horrified when I hear Mr. Modi go to Burma and say, we want connectivity with Myanmar. We are prepared to do anything. You've got 3 great infrastructure projects. What has happened? Does the man even know about them? He doesn't. Who's there to brief him? Because in his entourage, there's no one who knows it either. So I'll stop there. So I think we want to focus. I say, unless we restructure this, there is no hope. We've got to repatriate power to the people from the bottom up and have a new constitutional structure, which in its own way can be replicated for the Northwest, but that's another matter, so that we can build a five-tier India. Panchayati Raj, Zilla Parishads, etc. State, regional councils, by whatever name you want to call them, with independent powers, constitutional rights, and then Parliament. This is not a council for secession, but for integration. Thank you. I apologize to my fellow speakers for having rambled and ranted on and on. But we've got four very experienced persons. Mr. Pandey, Chief Secretary, Nagaland, then was the interlocutor with the Naga underground. Mr. Oinam Bhagat, who teaches at Jawaharlal Nehru and runs the Northeast Center there. Mr. Shrivastava, who was a member of the Northeast Council and served in that region for many years. And Falguni Rajkumar, who was also the head of the Northeastern Council, is currently chairperson of the Institute of Management in Shillong. All thoroughly knowledgeable about the Northeast and conversant with its background and history. So how should we start? Falguni, would you like to kick off?
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I must thank Mr. Verghese for inviting me. It's a privilege to be amongst you all, and especially with the distinguished members on the dais. I will put the proposition of my views slightly differently. First of all, I believe that one must understand the concept of the Northeast region first. Do you really have a reason? Everybody talks about it. But to me, it has got three meanings. Number one, in the formal sense, it's in a geocentric manner. It's a geographically defined place when you talk of a region. The second categorization is what I call the functional. Functional because it is divided into states. And third is what I call the vernacular. Why vernacular? Because the rest of India understands the Northeast as a block. It has more of a physical dimension rather than the fact that the region has human beings in it. Now that's precisely where the problem comes in. Now this is a legacy which we have inherited from the British. Because when we define the Northwest or the Northeast frontier, it was a geostrategic definition which is a geomorphological definition of a part of the country without the due emphasis on human beings, or what sociologists call the ethnocentric way of looking at problems. Now obviously things changes. Unfortunately, at independence we inherited the same pattern of looking at problems. Next question is, do we really have a concept or idea of what we call the Northeast? Now, there's those who are sociologists, anthropologists, there's a very nice terminology which George Simmel, a well-known sociologist, he defined something called a Simmel's law. Now, Simmel's law is a principle in which a social group response, their cohesiveness or define their cohesiveness depending on the kind of external pressure that is exerted on them. Which means all Northeasterners, when they are in Delhi, irrespective of which state they come, they are all one. I have been here as a student right from 1965, spent 5 long years, taught for a year in university. And once we have a situation which we are facing at the moment, I need not define it, everybody knows about it. We all unite. Now it is the same group of people when they get back home into the Northeast. We get into our burrows. Then we become individual identities which is restricted within the space of the state that we call Nagaland, Manipur, Tripura, Assam, etc., etc. I think this is again a legacy that we have inherited post-independence. Now, unfortunately for the government, this ethnic identity which came to us became a political necessity when Nagaland was created in 1963. And thereafter, the ethnicization, the state, the region split by the reorganization of state in 72-73. So what did we do? We created a region where it is politically wise, politically desirable, but economically and financially, if I may use the word, a disaster. Because if you look at the 13 Finance Commission, the non-planned revenue deficit of 52,000 crores of the country, more than 65% goes to the Northeast. The rest goes to other states all over India. Which means that all these states are not able to sustain themselves independent of central devolutions of funds. Even Assam and Sikkim, once the devolution of funds takes place, they just cross marginally, but without it, again they are in the red. If one looks back at the time of independence, then Assam, the combined state, was among the top 5 states in India in terms of GSDP. The gross state domestic product of Assam was at par with some of the best states in the country. Partly because Assam had rich mineral resources at its disposal. But once the fragmentation took place, today we are nowhere. So the prescription that I have, I'll come straight to the point. We have debated while I was in active service. I'm still active, though by virtue of indirectly being the chairman of a management institute where I have the liberty to have all the value systems that the youngsters bring from all over the country. So I get enriched by interacting with them. The question is, it's high time that we have, today the world is getting much smaller. It's a much flatter world. If this be so, when today in the Asia-Pacific region, we have the Trans-Pacific Partnership led by the United States, and just 2 days ago, the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, where China is leading, has set up the free trade area of Asia and Pacific. That means the world is combining itself. I have always believed in the fact that economically the Northeast should become one entity. Politically, let each state be as it is, because to be practical, real politics dictates that it is impossible to reorganize the Northeast in terms of its political boundaries. What did we give to ourselves to manage this part of the country? We gave two institutions. The Northeast Council, which, 2 more minutes, Mr. Verghese has very aptly described. But let me say, both donor and NEC, the crux of the problem is state plans, funds are approximately 25,000 crores. And the Northeast Council budget at an average is 6,000 crores. Donor is another 6,000 or 7,000 crores. Where is 25,000 crores? Assam gets the largest chunk of it, about 9,000 to 10,000 crores. The smallest is Mizoram, which gets about 1,500 crores. If I divide again 5,000 crores into 7 or 8 states, please estimate how much each state will get. Please tell me no state chief minister worth his salt would ever go to NEC or come to donor for a measly few 50, 60, not even hundreds crores of rupees per annum. So obviously, by the very structure of financial devolution, you are placed to institution which has no power. I'll straight come to the point. My solution, therefore, what I recommend is that both the three problems that the Northeast suffers today, number one, security, economic development, and people-to-people contact. I think it's high time we started all the states, chief ministers, the governors, the people, that in terms of economy, we need to combine ourselves to solve the problem of the Northeast together. I give a lecture once every year in the National Defense College here in Delhi. And I have propounded the theory that if European Union can work in Europe, why can't an economic union be similarly not enforced in the Northeast? The model I have before me is the Greater Mekong Sub-Regional Development, a region which is functioning beautifully. And let me also share that what we started in the beginning of the 11th plan, for the first time in the history of this country, ladies and gentlemen, the 8 states of the Northeast has achieved a GSDP higher than the national average. 9.95 is the Northeastern's achievement as against the national average in the 12th plan of 8%. I am happy I was part of it to begin with for half the period. Shrivastava ji continued as a member. The whole question is, if your vision is clear, if you have the desire, we can succeed. I think the message should go from here, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest that what we need to do is that the Northeast must learn to combine, at least economically, and develop. Let the state be as it is. And I entirely agree with you that in terms of substructures of administration, either it is the Panchayat Raj system or the village council, whatever under the 6th schedule, let that function. But at the top, unless the top leaders start seeing it as one single economic entity, I'm afraid it's going to be very, very difficult. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, we're running out of time. 1:20. आप कुछ कहेंगे? Mr. Shrivastava? 10 minutes?
I'm sorry, did I take?
Doesn't matter. Thank you.
Mr. Verghese, Mr. Rajkumar, Professor Oinam, and Mr. Pandey, and very distinguished members of the audience. First of all, I speak with a spirit of great humility in presence of such stalwarts and some of my friends and colleagues here who have got far more experience. For example, Dr. Bhupender Singh is here among the audience. He is an expert on tribal administration and tribal affairs, and I had the privilege of serving with him, both as joint secretaries of both of us in the Home Ministry for some time, and I've learnt a lot from him. First of all, I'll not repeat what my friend Mr. Falguni Rajkumar has said. See, first of all, the general impression in the rest of the country as well as in the Northeast is that Northeast is very backward, very poor, and it must continue to get aid from outside, otherwise it's very difficult to survive. The facts are exactly opposite. Northeastern region is in fact one of the most, one of the richest regions of the country, with its human resources. Absolute potential is absolutely great. I'll tell you how. Secondly, it's geoclimatically, it's a bit of a constraint, but its advantages are many. It's a biodiversity hotspot. The forests are plentiful there. People, in fact, left to the tribal people, they are the best protectors of forests because their whole life depends on that. Then water, which is going to be a great, valuable and a scarce commodity, is plentiful there. And we are not overpopulated. 8% of geographical population, geographical area, and 4% of population roughly. So every way it is only that mindset which has been created partly by us and partly from them itself, and the historical factor which gives this impression. You see what happened in the good old days, centuries back, all people from all sides of all directions came and populated that area. And all of them, each community depended on identical sort of resource and for their sustenance, and that was the land, the forests, and the waters. And so, the neighbors, among the neighbors, it was more a rivalry over control of and expansion and control, rather than neighborhood friendship. So that has to be kept in mind. That was necessary, inevitable in that condition. But that is what. So over 300 such communities are there. Each has developed its own culture. They are quite similar, but then there are differences. And each is very, very proud of its culture. And there are the 5 qualities this thought of civilization has developed, and which I call the tribal Panchasheel, which is far ahead of anything else. Number 1, truthfulness. Total truthfulness within the community. Number 2, honesty. No tribal person will cheat anybody of his own tribe. Thirdly, transparency. You tell one small thing, secret thing to one person, the whole community, it will be passed on to the whole community because of the cohesion. Then fourthly, the community interests were always taken far above individual interests. And fifth, where they beat the Western civilization, is the system of decision making in the community. Every issue will be discussed. Population was small, so it was possible also. Discussed, thrashed out, and the 2 parties, one for it, they opposed it. But after a consensus decision is taken, it is totally unanimous, not only in words but in spirit also. The man who was opposing it will also fall in line. And here you see our highly esteemed legislators They are fighting like now, we saw the other day on the TV, fighting came to the physical fighting. And even the governor was, if I use a strong word, assaulted. It is far superior there. Everybody then has a dinner together and things go on. So, only thing is, because of this historical thing, this thing is limited only to the tribe. Now that rivalry thing is over, nobody is going to transcend others' territory. Therefore, only through education, proper education, right from primary school upwards, this value system and his value system being the same, where is the enmity? Where is the... So, this thing, so many voices here and geographical entity in the rest of the country, that will be sought out. But that's a long-term solution. But this has to be, this has to come from us also, from the outside also. This has to be told to them. Then it will. Now, briefly, in this thing, what are the remedies? Now, remedies are firstly, we have to sort out the contradictions there. The contradiction, and that is being fueled by the outsiders, by our politicians, small-time or big-time politicians also. Number one is the question of identity. For a tribal community, the question of identity is very strong. They think that if they open out to others, they will be wiped out. Their culture will be wiped out. It is a fallacy, in fact, because if that isolationism is there, then where will the progress come? So it is identity versus progress. This has to be sorted out. There are solutions. After all, other people have also progressed and retained their culture, yet integrated with the community economically and socially also. Then second is the...
8 minutes also.
This again gives rise, this is the basic thing, gives rise to feeling of insider, outsider. Now you want, and this also gives rise to the, what I call the grievance and blame syndrome. Anybody coming from Delhi against the central government, this is the syndrome. That, okay, you did not do this, you did not do this, you don't understand all these things. But then what have I done to do that? So that has also to, it is mostly a psychological mindset. Otherwise. And then economically, we want good economy, goods to go, as Verghese has said, and as Mr. Rajkumar has also said. But the security is not there. So, and the cost, the extortion cost of a truck moving from the border to this side is far above the value of goods in it. So how can it be, how can trade go on? Now these are things. And yet, all these can be solved if that mindset can be changed by both from the message that we get from outside and from within. Now his state, Manipur for example, is one state where people have got excellence in every field of life, be it wrestling, be it sports, be it games, be it literature, be it art, be it poetry, be it drama. Ratan Thyam is a world-known figure in drama. So all these things are there. And yet, there is only one deficit, and that is the trust deficit. And there, the role of the government has to come in. If the government, that system which has been imposed in our democracy, in fact, we have destroyed democracy there. The real democracy was functioning there, and now because of the legal democracy, we have destroyed that system. And once that is restored, as I said, I will not go into details. If it is from bottoms-up approach, as Mr. Verghese has very rightly said, things would that will change the psychology. Then people who owned the government earlier, now government is something alien from which you extract as much money as you can. And this has given rise to a totally egalitarian society, has been turned into the very rich, the creamy layer, and the masses. The small states, the distance between the common man and the center of power should have been very little. It used to be negligible. They were all, now it is very far, like any other state.
Thank
Now,
you.
these are the things which have to be done, and I'm sure, I'm very happy that Mr. Verghese has thought, this is very opportune time for it, because now we have got a new system coming up with all its shortcomings and things, but it is new, and it is very promising system. And we hope that a lot of progress will in Northeast we will see under this new regime. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Can you have Mr. Pandey? The academic is always good at winding up.
Thank you. Thank you. I was about to request that.
Mr. Verghese, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Well, a few random thoughts I'll also contribute. Part of it could be repetition, part of it coming out of experience, having worked in Delhi, associated with Northeast, having worked in a part of Northeast. Well, this restructuring that we are talking about, I think this restructuring has been going on in the Northeast, even in pre-independence days, and certainly post-independence, a considerable amount of restructuring has already happened. And whosoever thought of this restructuring, it was a response to a problem. When the British decided to name certain areas as excluded areas, partially excluded areas, well, there was a purpose. They thought they can be brought under the ambit of the British administration only by partially taking them inside and giving them lot many autonomous powers which the rest of India need not be given. So there was a conscious effort at that time. When a line called Inner Line was drawn by the British, it was for a purpose. Now, post-independence, there was Assam, Union territories, and now a lot of restructuring happened. First, the state of Nagaland was created. At that point of time, nobody could really think that a population which is only 3 lakhs would become a state. It became a state. And we all know why it became a state. It was a response to a problem. There was insurgency and there was some 16-point agreement, as a result of which this small population became a full-fledged state, and with some special protection and some special powers. When Nagaland became a state, well, many voices started coming from many other parts of Northeast India, and there were many other states in the Northeast. Then there was another restructuring, this scheduled areas, given special constitutional powers. And why all this happened? Because the Nagas could no longer tolerate, if I can use that word, hegemony of the Assamese. And many movements there are going on which the people inside that small region, apart from the grievances against India as a whole, well, that remains in many parts. But there were grievances from within the Northeastern region. So Falguni very rightly said, if anybody thinks that it's a homogeneous Northeast region, I think one has to understand the region very properly. It's very heterogeneous, 45 million people, over 300 ethnic, sub-ethnic groups. So it cannot be called homogeneous by any standard. Now, when we are talking of restructuring today, and Government of India also did some restructuring, the ministry, donor ministry, what has it achieved? Why was it created? Then the Northeastern Council, limited power or more powers, but then to what extent we have made a success of it? And if not, then why? Was it wrong conceptually? Or the people who worked it, they did not buy it? Or the state governments or the real stakeholders, to the extent they need to buy into it, they did not buy into it to that extent? What is the reason? So restructuring, Government of India also has thought, within the region there has been a lot of restructuring. And today if we are talking of restructuring, why? To redress what? And I think, and all of us know, we have talked about it also, that in certain manners, in certain issues, Northeast India stands out very distinctly from the rest of India. Development is not one of them. There are many regions in India where development is much less than the Northeast. My own district in Bihar, in terms of per capita income, it is worse off than Nagaland, where I have served almost whole of my life. But then, in Bihar, there is no insurgency. There will never be an insurgency. Insurgency against the Indian state. Now, a district in Bihar, howsoever poor it might be, it can agitate for many other things, but it will never agitate to secede. We granted statehoods to many in the Northeast. Insurgency remains. So, the problems which engendered insurgencies, they still remain. In fact, the number of insurgent groups, we all know how many groups were there when India became independent and how many groups are there even today after a lot of restructuring. So, problem which we have mentioned, problem is we call them chinkies here. There we hear the words, are you from India? Or this is mainstream India. This is a problem of mindset. Appointment of governors. People who are to be displaced from another state which will never dream of insurgency. A governor, in order to be punished, is sent to a state in the Northeast. So it's a question of attitude. Now the powers and prerogatives of the governors remain the same, whether it is a state in the Northeast or any other state. But then I think it's a problem of mindset. When I get Nagaland cadre, why do I feel that, well, oh God, what crime did I commit? So there is a problem of perception. It's not necessarily a problem of development. So it's a problem of perception. And that psychological distance, and I have a feeling, if I can talk honestly, many people in the Northeast don't feel they can influence Indian mainstream systems, which Biharis can feel. Bihar, despite being very backward, they feel that they are politically present in India. Many people in the Northeast, they don't feel that they are politically present in India. Like, I've been in Nagaland, so Nagas come more in mind. One member in parliament, Lok Sabha. Now, how many times? In Lok Sabha one, in Rajya Sabha one. Similar is the plight of other states. If not one, there will be two.
Total 37.
Total,
37.
yes, except Assam. And therefore the problems in the Northeast, to the extent it is in Assam, is very different from the extent to which it is there in many other parts of Northeast. So political presence is very necessary. 4% population of India, occupying an area of 8% of India's land, and this is an advantage. The land-man ratio is very high, environmental capital is very high, biodiversity is very high, social capital is very high, and these are the strengths of the Northeast, which is not there to this extent in the rest of India. But the political mainstreaming is not there. Maybe history also has contributed to it. Maybe to some extent geography also has contributed to it, but I think it's more a question of mindset. And how to do this political mainstreaming, that is very, very important. I got a little sense of it when I was doing these negotiations. And Manipur has a point of view which we have to understand. And neither Manipur is politically very much present in India, nor are Nagas very much politically present in India. So, I think some kind of constitutional rethinking, if some political mainstreaming is to be done, probably is necessary. Look at China. China's members in parliament, there are 2,000 plus. Here it's 500 something. Now why not begin with the Northeast? I agree with Mr. Verghese entirely. 5 regional councils. Because if nothing else, at least because of geographical some kind of division and also distinctiveness. These 5 regional councils, the concept was there. Interstate councils are there. They are not even meeting properly because there is no interest. The chief ministers are chief ministers of states. Now why do they cede power to something which is called regional in nature? So I don't know whether we will be able to go retrograde back. But some kind of political mainstreaming, even the rest of India probably will be tempted to consider if more members are there. And begin with these small communities, tribal communities, where the sense of belongingness is not there. And the Nagas, I was negotiating. I said, you have to give up the idea of secession. And they said, yes, what you talk makes sense. But we have to be more politically present in India. And I think it makes sense. And if Nagas want it, many other communities in the Northeast will also want it. So I think that is my one point. Internal security, the Armed Forces Special Power Act, it was enacted only because of insurgency in Nagaland. And then how can you use, if you can't use army in Chhattisgarh, where there is a more sinister problem because of these Maoists, and more people are being killed, qualitatively also it creates more damage. And when you have taken a position, and rightly so perhaps, that army should not be used against your own people. Why should we use army there? Why should we use army in J&K, except at the borders? So, this Armed Forces Special Power Act should certainly go. Sharmila's legendary fast. It doesn't make much of news. So Northeast is forgotten. I think that mindset has to change. And it all has to begin with the elites. Elites in the national consciousness first, and then the elites in the Northeast itself. Now some of them are really elites, those who have been in positions of power for some time, whichever party they may belong to. Look at this infiltration. Infiltration also is one area where it is most in the Northeast. We gave Bodoland Territorial Council, I think, in the early 2003 or so. And in 2012, what happened? The number of people who faced displacement, 4 to 5 million people. I think that is unprecedented in the history of India after partition. In that small place it was happening, so it didn't make much news. About 100 people, 80, 100 people were killed. So it has not happened to that extent. Now this infiltration, why did it happen? How are we going to regularize it? These are big, vexed political questions for which some solution has to be found out. About development, now development is a central subject, it is a state subject, it is the regional council subject, it is the panchayat subject. Now under the constitutional amendment, much of the development has to take place right at the panchayat level, then at the state level. Now, there are certain things which are important for the region as a whole, and there I agree with the learned speakers here, there has to be a regional planning. And a body which is a Northeast regional body, preferably located in the Northeast, peopled by people who are from the Northeast, or some people who happen to know Northeast. I think it has to be there. Otherwise, the kind of treatment which we have been giving to the Northeast has not been fair. Look at donor. I was in the government when donor was created. And I really thought, not this 500 crore odd, 1 minute. This 500 crore is not important for Northeast. But what is important for Northeast, like a Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, they are looking after certain aspects of education for the whole of India. Well, it's a concurrent subject or a state subject, so states are also primarily responsible. But the knowledge which donor should impart to all ministries that, look, this is Northeast. You don't know Northeast, but I know Northeast. this did not happen. It became only a funding body. And then there was a clash between NEC and donor. What are you doing? So what are you doing? And it's all a game of disbursing money here and there. So people who feed the central ministries about this, about the distinctiveness of Northeast and heterogeneity within the so-called one regional area which exists, I think that is also very, very important. So a body like donor, which can be NEC, or the donor could be located in Shillong or Guwahati, but must feed the central ministries, because central ministries have a role for the whole country, including the Northeast. And then the centrally sponsored scheme should not be thrust on them. 500,000 people on both sides of McMahon line, Chinese border. I mean, that has to be exclusive responsibility of the central government, and I don't think that should ever go to the regional council. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, we have our scholar, Bhagat Oinam, JNU. Academics also have a great mastery of pulling together things and extracting the essential wisdom from what has been said. Over to you, Bhagat.
Thank you, Mr. Verghese. I don't know the kind of challenge you have given it to me to almost tie the things, notes together. I'm greatly privileged to be around with senior bureaucrats who have at one time worked so much for the region, and also I'm very happy that more recently with Mr. R.S. Pandey, someone the Nagas really look to you not only as an Indian but a good Indian, you know. So I can see that from the way you have spoken, that the embeddedness with which you have lived, not only work, but it was your karma bhumi. I would put it in that way. That is the spirit of how you have worked. Not that you don't see it as a punishment anymore, but I think you are deeply rooted into the life and the people there. Let me just, Mr. Verghese thought that a student of philosophy can also speak on something on Northeast, and I come from philosophy, but I take lots of interest on Northeast, because when I read Plato and Aristotle, many more can do about it, but who will do for the Northeast? Who will theorize on the Northeast? And that was a challenge with which I enter into the region and the issues the region is faced with. I'm quite happy in JNU with reasonably good salary, which any professor is getting, but then you are existentially located there. Things that happen in the region, you just can't feel so comfortable with your own student talking about high theories. But you feel that, well, you have to do something else. And only perhaps thinking is a way, and good thinking can also help in many ways, I believe. First thing I will do, I will not go into the nuts and bolts which was so well articulated, explained by the speakers all throughout, but I will try to put a perspective. And for me, two things are very important. One, historically, I would like to look into it. And secondly, which I do not know exactly what is the intention of the speakers so far when they spoke about what you call mindset. And for me, mindset is extremely important. It is through the mindset that you conquer the world. It is through the mindset that you internalize your own being. It is through the mindset that you reach out to the other. And it is also with the same mindset that you open yourself to the other. I mean, I'll give two distinct analogy. One which you might think is not related, but think of Newton's thinking, why the apple has not fallen up. I'm using the word fallen up and not fallen up, but falling down. It was a funny mindset at that point of time. But that particular mindset led the person to think throughout, to come up as an adult, a scientist who has changed the entire theory of physical body's movement in this universe. This chinky mindset, I'll tell you another anecdote, and that mindset, how it gets translated into violence today. My friend was telling me, a Manipuri friend, which I never hardly faced throughout, because from the year of 9, I moved out to schools like Ramakrishna Mission, where I stayed with people in Bengal, learning Bengali, going to Punjab, learning bit of Punjabis, and they have always been so nice to me. And unfortunately, I say, I've always found good Indian people, so-called. This is how I look at it. But see, this friend of mine who found that a kid was coming with her mother, and the mother says, "Mummy, jungly," with a eureka kind of thing, you know. So, "Mummy, jungly." Then mummy tells her, "Nahi, beta, aise nahi bolte." Goes. Next day, after 2-3 days, the boy again meet them in the same flat. A rented house in Chandigarh. "Mummy, chinky." Now you can see that from where does the child learn this vocabulary called jungly? And that is to be denoted to a particular set of people with a particular feature, which again got corrected as chinkies. So this is how the culturations takes place in the society. And this is, mind you, all about mindsets. When a person in 60s, 70s, 90s, when Mr. Falguni was studying here, maybe there were very few. And they were exotic features. Exotic, I say.
5 of us.
Yeah. Now, even in my time, it might be hundreds. Still, we were found to be nice, friendly. But when it comes to thousands, imagine in Delhi. Delhi's corners, you go to any of these malls, you will find the so-called chinkies, either as a manager, small in number, but a salesman, salesgirls, plenty in number. Call center, they are plenty in number. Go to ghettoized areas like Munirka, then not the South X, but below the South X, I don't know, all those Yusuf Sarai, all those areas you will find cheaper renting places, plenty of them. Sometimes a set of nuisance, sometimes a kind of discomfort. The same chinkies which might be exotic or which is nobody at one point, when it becomes a big number, then that mindset's translated into an uncomfortable zone, and violence is nothing but reflection or manifestation of that mindset. To me, mindset is extremely important. You can take it positively, you can take negatively. That is how I look at it. The same mindset comes into the entire framing of the Northeast, which Mr. Verghese was saying, the difficult terrain. I would say that I will go back to the basic questions, fundamental question of political philosophy. After all, why is the state for? Presuming that state is a necessary to run, you call governance, what is the state for? Is the state for to retain its own authenticity, identity, and security? Or is the state to channelize for its own people what its people ought to be? These are two different things, mind you, but inseparable, yet they are two different questions. One is those who would talk about national security so strongly. I am not against talking about national security. After all, if the Indian state is not strong enough, it might disintegrate. That fear is there, I can understand that. But at the same time, will you prioritize the national security over and above the human security? This is $1 million question, and last 60 years or so, India's policy towards the Northeast is governed by the first mindset, its own security. The doubt begins with due respect, and I can understand that. I'm not someone who will be, beating or critiquing Patel, because his birthday now today is, considered as a national integration or unity day. And well done, I'm not against that. It was because of him perhaps India is what it is. But it is also he who said at one point of time that when Manipur was merged, he said, is there no brigadier in the Shillong? Meaning which, that if the king says something or the region's representative says something, what is there? You have an army, control it. So the mindset, I can say that, I can see the problem of partition at that point of time. China is a power that India has to look into. One can see the global scenario, but this is a mindset with which it works. And all my submission is, and this is a theoretical framing, but it fits well with what Mr. Pandey was saying, that all that policy that comes up, restructuring of the region, institutional restructuring of the region we have seen in the last 60 years, or even before, during the time of colonial period, were all governed by responses to. And why is this response? Because there is something called state, and state is sacrosanct. If there is any problem that comes up, then you try to nitty-grittyly, whip things to control that uncomfort zones. So policy framings are always done in terms of responding to. And my submission now is that it is high time that India is becoming already a strong nation, a nuclear power. It doesn't have to fear Northeast disintegration anymore. And I hope those in the parliament should also think the same way as we think here, as a common man thinks. And if you agree with that, then the whole question should focus on the region's own priority, peoples of the region's own priority, no more in the national security. True, the national security is something that we consider, but please, for heaven's sake, your policy towards the region should not be informed by this mindset, but by the mindset the region on its own must come up. And it is here that I think Mr. Falguni's emphasis on economic integration is extremely important. But sir, I would submit also at the same time that whether you like it or not, Northeast still has a communitarian way of ethos of life, which Mr. Shrivastava has talked in terms of examples and so on. We still live, I and he might be in Delhi as an individual citizenry. But once you go to the Northeast, he is no more seen as IAS Falguni, but he is seen as a Meitei. Let him go to Nagaland and we will see that he is not seen as a citizen of India, but he is first seen as a Meitei. And that also a Rajkumar. So it tells a lot more story. So if that is the case, there is need perhaps to even think of, and this is, let me flag up at this point, can we think of something of a semi-parliament of the Northeast in terms of what you call regional council? And this regional council should represent ethnic communities across the board, and maybe in the same number, because throughout we have been playing democracy of the number. But here, if you can think of representations of even the smallest community and listen to their voices, can there be a space? Perhaps that could be where, what the people thinks. And this thinking might be, very raw. This thinking may be at times romantic, but this thinking can also be channelized through ways of articulation and debating into forms of governance and institutional mechanisms. And that can integrate well with your idea of finance, what you call economic integration, because economic integration should not end up only for the elitist agenda or state agenda, but it must really think for the people. And that people is the community that I will submit. And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, we may have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A, and in the process, you can address your questions generally. I will give an opportunity to our speakers to respond to some of these things that have been said. So, please, the floor is yours.
I have a question for Mr. Pandey.
Just identify yourself.
My name is K.S. Subramaniam.
Oh,
I was in the government of India
okay.
as well as in the Northeast. Yesterday somebody was asking me, government of India waiting for Muiva and Swu to die so that they can solve the Naga problem. Because, you have been an interlocutor for how many years? 5 years?
No, I was, 4 years.
4 years. And Mr. Padmana Bhaiya, 15 years. What the hell is going on?
Thank you. Well, difficult to say.
Maybe set of questions can we take?
Okay.
That might be better.
Yeah.
I think. Lakshmi.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Bina Lakshmi, and I think I never knew that this is going to be. There was a fascinating discussion. More revolutionary ideas came out from that table than I've ever seen anywhere. I think. Thank you, Tamoga Bhagat, for your semi-parliament of the Northeast. I have been, as a younger citizen from there, we have been thinking on peace processes, how to bring about peace. as Tamo Bhagat also said, please don't think us as security concerns, but as normal people, normal, wanted to live a normal life out there. So I endorse his viewpoint in terms of how do we, which also builds it into, I think, earlier speakers who said about Mr. Pandey also so beautifully and humanely spoke about the need of more political representation in the region, and brilliant idea about ethnic councils and representation. We must work towards it if we don't want more serious concerns there. The other question is to Falguni. How will you economically integrate the Northeast? I had this question. How will you do it? I just had a simple question. And finally, to Mr. Mr. Shrivastava, I think you used a word called, which I do not subscribe, which is called tribal panchil. Not everything out there, sir, is tribal. So I think we have to be very careful while using these words. I love your concepts, but then tribal panchil is one word I had difficulty because not everyone is a tribal in the Northeast. You know that. You know that, right? And second, decision-making, yes, very important, but decision-making in tribal councils, quote-unquote, in parts of Northeast where it exists, doesn't include any woman. So we're at the moment really working at the grassroots with Naga women, Assamese women, Arunachali women to ensure how can women be part. A council where women's voices, which consider half the population is absent, we consider that's difficult for us to look. So thank you so much for this really wonderful panel.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Upinder Singh?
I'm sorry I came a little late, so I do not know some part of what I'm going to say might have been discussed earlier with the chairman. But I have got one point which I would like to make. That is, see, we have been discussing here about the restructuring of the Northeast. And so far as I know, it has been considered mostly at the state level, central level, state level. And I do not know whether it has really been discussed at the lower levels also. For example, in entire Northeast, excepting perhaps Nagaland, the district councils are there, and the regional councils were there earlier, but they are not there now. And lower down, they have got their own traditional councils and all that. And there is an entire framework which has been there in the sixth schedule about them. Now, can we also give a closer look to these in order to strengthen the democratic system there? Obviously, the panchayati system which we have in the rest of India doesn't suit, and that has also been made clear in several laws. In Constitution itself also it's made clear. So, if we talk of restructuring to strengthen the Northeast, the consideration to be given to the structures lower down than the state ought to be also given some attention. And then they have to be really linked to each other. So that's one point. And the second point is about the ethnic regional councils which have been considered here. Now, long ago, in 1989, I was involved in this Bodo problem. And there I wrote the report of the Bodo problem also. And fortunately, I remember now, just recollect, when you talk to the regional ethnic council, I made a mention of one small suggestion there, which has been perhaps overlooked all these years. It could not have been considered in the fury of the problem there and the busy schedules of the people in Delhi. That was you could have another house in Assam, maybe upper house, where you could have the representation of the ethnic communities in that house, and thereby you could increase their voice. in the polity of Assam. So thereby then you can also bring in this question of Bodos, how they would be satisfied with what sort of representation and what sort of democratic institutions, etc., they could be considered there. But that didn't come to the notice of anybody at all at that time. So when you're thinking of this regional ethnic council and all that, you could please also coordinate all these so that the whole thing becomes a really suitable mesh. The third is one question which I want to ask, because I would like to say very clearly that I've been highly enriched by the speaker's knowledge and all that, and I go back more educated. But one thing I would like to know is how do we tackle the insurgency in the Northeast? Of course, some references have been made in these speeches, but is it possible to take it in a more intensive way and find out some solutions? Of course, what the suggestions which have been made here overall might lead to that destination, that purpose. But considering that this insurgency is very much alive now, before that destination is reached, is it possible to find out some short-term solutions for this? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think we have time for any more questions. Would our panelists like to respond?
Well, the Naga insurgency, I don't think it will be appropriate for me to enunciate in very precise terms here as to what has been agreed and what remains to be agreed. I think it will not be correct. But let me tell you, in 2012, we did issue a joint press release, and where we said, and very honestly I can tell you that press release is correct. That press release is correct, and the press release said only this, in very somewhat ambiguous terms, because it cannot be precise till it is finalized, that most of the points had been agreed to except one or two. And Government of India's major concern had also been addressed. But then you are right in saying that why did it not see the light of the day? Well, if the government of the day wants everything to be agreed to by all concerned, then in a situation like this, it just doesn't happen. And that is how it is going on and on and on. But once your major concern about secession is agreed to, once a non-territorial solution is also agreed to, I think if you can't agree to anything, then there will be no agreement. So I would also say that the government at that point of time was in its last leg. It had to come to elections, and maybe that could be one reason why they couldn't take a decisive decision. Otherwise, many things had been worked out at that point of time. And I'm sure with a little bit of give and take by all concerned, by the states in the region which are involved, by the central government, and by the people who are negotiating from that side, I think it should see light of the day. But there has been much meeting of mind. I mean, that till I was there, till about a year back, that was the position. Now today, what is there, I don't know.
Thank you.
No, they have a new interlocutor, but what the position remains of the two sides. The interlocutor is less important than the positions of the two sides, because interlocutor only facilitates meeting of the two minds. But the two minds...
Yeah, sure.
Okay. My question is very specific. Bina has been very specific. Bina, unfortunately, we can't elaborate and talk on this issue here today, but the economic integration is already there in the sense that the NEC is empowered by law to take up all interstate matters. So, for example, any issues between two or more states, the NEC looks after all the project and schemes. It is already there. We need not go far. Veerappa Moili's Administrative Reforms Commission has very categorically mentioned what has been articulated by me in very clear terms. It is that the states remain as they are politically. That will not be touched. It cannot be touched. Let's accept the fact. But economically, most of the chief ministers are willing. It's coming in any case. Today you must have read in the paper that GST is coming. With GST is coming that the whole of the country is going to be a common market. Which means there will be no state boundaries insofar as trade and economics is concerned. The paper is already on. It is going to be laid before the cabinet and it will come before the parliament. Which means whole of India in terms of trade and commodities is going to be a borderless country. There will be no districts, there will be no state, there will be no subdivisions. Obviously, the whole of the Northeast, of all the places in the country, my view is it requires the most because we are physically so structured that unless we learn to look after your look-east policy, now now it has been changed as
LEP 03.
No, now it is called ACT. Acting East. That will not be able to do it. My thing is, it is already there, but I have always said that NEC remain largely on paper. It is a regional planning body. We have been doing the functions. One example, Mr. Chairman, to end with. Horticulture. Shrivastava ji is here. We introduced one fruit. Kiwis. Arunachal, then every state started it. You will not believe there's a factory in Mao which is supposed to crush it. The President of India came to inaugurate it. But because every state started producing, there is a glut.
No market.
So there is no market. The same thing with ginger. In Dipu, in Hoja, in Assam, we produce ginger. What happened? The middlemen came, finished the market. So these are areas where we can. But in so far as state-specific development projects are concerned, the state will continue to prioritize its area because each state has its own demand, its own need. So the economic integration is keeping in mind the ACT East policy or the Look East policy. And it's high time we did it. In any way, the country is going to do it. GST is coming. With that, there will be what is called the whole of the country is going to be a free market. Please read Economic Time today, page 10.
Thank you.
Well, Bina, your question. See, I volunteered for service in the Northeast, volunteered, way back in 1960. So I have become a tribal myself, mindset. But all the better points of it. We are all tribal communities at one time. It is only we are at different stages in our journey forward. So there is nothing derogatory in the word tribal. Tribal means a solid, united community. This surname here, Shrivastava, that is a tribe. What else it is? Just tell me. So that is one thing. So there is nothing derogatory or exclusive about tribal. This is the culture of a united thing, and it's a wonderful thing. Its system, in fact, this by introducing Panchayati Raj, the intention was good, but then it did not totally mesh with the local system, and therefore, you see, local system was by consensus. So always the right man, the really deserving man emerged. Now it is substituted by voting, where lots of hanky-panky goes on. So the influential person comes up. You see, it's not the emergence of the real leadership. So these are the things. That is number one. Number two, about women. There are societies, I have spent about 12 years in Arunachal Pradesh. There are societies where women also, they are, and there is the other way around also. Khasis, Garos, Jaintiyas, there is a matrilinear system. It is the youngest daughter who inherits the property. After marriage, the boy goes and lives with the girl's house, wife's house. Yet, in the darbar, women have no place.
Yeah.
So it is compensated. At home, she is the master. In the community, it is not. Now, this will also evolve now with more and more MLAs getting elected. It will get corrected. Now, third thing which I would like to say is about the NEC. NEC in a concept was exactly what, sir, you have suggested. When it was designed, I was there in 1971 and we had long discussion with Mr. B.K. Nehru, and it was designed like that, to be a regional forum. Earlier, from 71 onwards, it was an advisory body. In 2003 amendment, it became a statutory planning body, same functions, but given real powers. But then, so firstly, the chairman was an NRI, non-resident. And then it was so much influenced by the ministry here, where he spent most of the time, that NEC, the regional part, got neglected. Then there was no devolution of powers. We, as members, had the status of Union Minister of State. Yet, there was no power given. The secretary had always to go to the chairman, and chairman would, so that way how. So it is a failure of translation of the system into action. Now, I think with better, with a sort of a more evolved leadership, things may improve. Thank you.
Falguni, sorry.
Bhagat, yeah.
Bhagat?
Yeah, just 10 seconds. I think Government of India is in a very good position at this moment, comfortable position, by not coming to a solution. And I mean it, practically. What it has succeeded in the last 50 years is that from being a target of the insurgent groups, that earlier the insurgent groups were attacking the Indian state, machineries, maybe CRPF, army, so on, and officials. Now it is no more that. It is now from the role of a combatant or what you contestant party, the Indian state has very well, made itself into higher position of arbitrator. Now it arbitrates the demands of the Naga insurgents and demands of the Manipur state. So
you see the Pandey sitting there and sitting this side.
So it is no. So it is no more. It is no more that Indian state was attacked. Now Indian state is now negotiating with all this. See, like I am giving you this, but that party is not agreeing. So it is the arbitrator. And arbitrator would like to remain where it is as long this conflict remains. So that is how it is. Thank you.
One sentence from Mr.
One sentence in this context. The way out of this, what you have said is wonderful. Way out is what Manipur has also shown. A public agitation against insurgents for very high rate of extortion. Dharna in the market. Now that is public opinion alone can really fight this thing. It has happened. Manipur has shown the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We must thank the chair, no?
Yes.
No, the chair's going to thank his colleagues. He's not going to say anything more. But I still think the fundamental problem remains. As structured at present, the Northeast is dysfunctional. And we've got to address that problem. And there are many ways of doing it, and there are many components that can be built into it. There's no time to go into all of that. But I thank you all for a very good discussion and for the patience with which the audience has sat through this. And we hope that this will not be the end of the discussion, but you will go home and in your own fraternities and newspapers and whatever it is, you will discuss these issues to carry them forward. Thank you all once again.
We must thank the chair.
Yes, thank
We
you.
like to thank the chair.
Chair is duly thanked.